afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the COVID-19 Global Disruption Update. We've come to our last session of our monthly long sessions. It has been a great time for us to put these together, and we look forward to continuing to present more training sessions in the future. Just a note, these slides are updated as of today. So today's date is 4/23, April 23rd, 2020, just in case you're referencing this recorded session later. Now, speaking of recording, we are recording this webinar. And so if you do not want to participate in a recorded session, please exit the recording at this time. I would also like to take a moment and share that we are not attorneys or tax accountants, and as such, none of the information we are sharing should be construed as legal or financial advice. We always encourage our business partners to consult those partners for guidance for their own organizations. On the line from our team today, we have myself, Amanda Erickson, and Jeannie Valier from HRX Services. Jeannie, would you care to say hello?
Good afternoon. I'm really sad. This is our last one with Mike. That's it. We're coming to an end.
I know. At least in this format, right? So
right.
We may see other things, but for right now, yes, that's correct. And speaking of that, we are then joined today by our colleague and friend, Mike Kohler, working through Elevate Virtual. Mike, thank you for being our guest. Would you care to say hello?
Hello, everybody. A lot of familiar names and faces out there. Excited to see Paulette join us today. She's really our longest standing faculty member and is just a superstar. So yay, great to see you all.
No kidding. We are really looking forward to today's conversation. So let's get started. First, a little housekeeping. There is a chat feature at the bottom of your screen, which may be hidden from you, so you just need to hover down below in order to see that. You'll need to use your mouse to pull the toolbox up. All attendees are in listen-only mode, and so there's no opportunity to really unmute. And if you want to use the feature to ask questions directly, you can. Jeannie will be managing the chat box and answer questions as we go along. So as you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Jeannie will be managing that as we go, and also provide that as an opportunity to ask the whole group. Now, we do have some general content and questions that we'll share throughout the hour, so we're going to start with some of that information. And our plan really for the session today is to work through the questions and content we have and any additional questions that we get through the first hour, or we'll end at an hour, whichever comes first. So that's kind of our plan for today. Let's go ahead and get started. So since our last session on the 21st, just a couple of days ago, we've had some pretty significant updates here in the state of Colorado. And so for that reason, we're going to share a few key pieces of information, which would help some of our conversation and discussion as we go forward. So from the news conference, and these slides are from that conference that Governor Polis had earlier this week with his team, we've learned that some of our stay-at-home needs will be shifting and changing into a different direction. They've specified it really occurring at 3 different levels, kind of right now and going forward. So there's the stay-at-home level, which we're currently in, the safer-at-home level, and then protect our neighbors. Currently, like we said, we're at that stay-at-home level, and we're working toward moving to the safer-at-home. And there's some dates that have been presented in order to allow us to do that. Now, this brings for a lot of people probably a sense of relief, maybe less concern around financial challenges, and for business owners, maybe a sense of some normalcy coming back into the swing of things, you know, really being able to continue doing business a little more regularly. But for others, it equally brings a sense of concern and maybe anxiety to them. So we as HR folks, HR people in our spaces and leaders should be expecting and probably preparing for both situations. So during his presentation, he shared there are multiple scenarios for how we can move forward and what the risks are associated with that. Again, just kind of outlining what it could be. These are just speculations more or less, but it does give us some idea of what we could be expecting. Now, for those scenarios, we want to make sure that we can use that to help us move forward to that level 2 and level 3 areas that he was highlighting. So there are various scenarios, different types of things that you would need to do in order to align with that. We're really highlighting the last ones, which demonstrates kind of a combination approach and what I think they're overall really recommending. And it's called using the complementary actions to help continue to mitigate the risk for COVID-19 contagious spread. So specifically working through that reality of what our healthcare system could look like using those different scenarios, and the interventions or complementary measures, which include social distancing as we see it currently for our higher risk population. It creates our least area of concern. So that scenario F is really that least area of concern. However, as we know, we continue to hear, and we even see some protesting happening in certain areas. It is not only the health and welfare of our people physically that we're concerned with, it's also financial and mental health as well. So we do see this as trying to be kind of a combined effort for how do we make sure that we stay safe and healthy, but also can support our economy and people's needs for going forward. So that's what they've really highlighted with these options. Now, as you can see here, the final scenarios drastically reduces the need for significant healthcare resources and measures and allows for some form of normality and normality in the community. So as the governor shared, we've made it through the sprint and are now entering the marathon, which will be harder and more individualized, and responsibility is the focus. So I think we can also see that as we look to the timelines for estimated peak, that we are not over this yet. I mean, some of our timelines here reflected depending on how compliance focused we are and really working through this could extend even into the end of this year, which I don't think probably surprises anyone, but really seeing those dates kind of highlighted that for me. So our new normal essentially will continue to shape and evolve as we continue to mitigate this and work through it. Now, to quote the Doing My Part Colorado hashtag, which I thought was also awesome, what does this mean for us in the workplace and us as business leaders and business leaders in HR? Well, it means that we need to be considering and focusing on all areas of the business and strategizing for potential impacts that this could create in our own organizations. So that just because we are relaxing some areas, we're not back to business as usual, and we should plan for that. Specifically, when it comes to working through reopening in some areas, our office locations once again. So we're talking about being able to have our office locations open again at 50% with some precautions. And so that's really kind of in our wheelhouse to be able to make sure that we're mitigating and getting ready for that return to work. Additionally, we need to think and recognize that as we return to business, our schools and childcare options will remain closed. So this is interesting because this means that our employees potentially could be impacted by some of the other legislation that we've seen. So FFCRA could be impacted, and that could be a consideration as we're working through some of these changing dynamics and how we're bringing people back into the workforce, or whether or not we're going to continue to allow for some remote work availability. Okay, so that being said, and for that reason, let's bring on our panel and our team here to discuss what some of that might look like, or some additional questions that we should be considering as we're working, excuse me, through the way back. So, first question that we had, and I'm going to go now to Jeannie and Mike on the phone. So our first question, we are in stay-at-home and moving to safer at home. What does that mean for business, or what are the things that we should be thinking about? What would be some suggestions that you would maybe consider if you're thinking about your HR teams out there? And either
Mike,
one.
Do you want to go first?
Well, I am brimming with an answer because it's this. this going back thing, you are not going back. Nobody's going back because back ain't there. There's a new set of circumstances that we're operating in. And so it's almost like re-onboarding is required regarding work conditions, regarding attitudes, regarding safety, lots and lots of things. So this going back, no, conditions have changed. It's like, let's all adapt to the new normals, which, by the way, seem to be changing weekly.
I would agree with that, right? It's that new normal. We have to be in kind of this constant adaptation of what that means and what that looks like. Lucky for us, HR, we're change agents. We're masters at this. This is what we know how to do, right? I don't know if we were preparing for this level, but I would say that some of our training has certainly helped us in it. Jeannie, what are some things that you think about?
Well, I agree with everything Mike said. I think I take it a little bit differently, or I look at it a little bit differently. I think I agree. We're not returning to work, but I shared with Amanda earlier. It's a new word. It's called reintegration. It's how do we reintegrate to the new normal? I hate that phrase, actually. What it is today, though, I mean, this is our day in life. You know, what are some of the things that we should look at? We initially stopped all visitors from coming into most workplaces. Now, do we allow that again? Or do we say, no, we're going to keep that in effect? What kind of day of training when, half of our workforce starts showing up, or we start having varied schedules, or any of that? Are we going to provide them training, or are they just going to show up and say, okay, here, good luck? I think we need to do that. I think we're HR people. We need to get in front of it. We need to say, okay, here's how we want to phase back our staff. Maybe we look at our office staff and say, okay, who's that tier one most critical staff that has to come back to the office because they perform best? Maybe it's just their abilities, or they need the infrastructure. And then we have that tier two who wants to come back. Who's that preferred staff? Maybe even that tier three of, can they work in either location? So maybe, some days, 2 days a week they're in the office and 2 days they're working remote. I think it's also kind of encouraging departments to work together and determine what that work schedule looks like. Working with your facilities or janitorial services. Now you have people back in the office. You got to clean for it. You got to prepare for it. You've got to sanitize. PPE equipment, that for people who worked in offices, that wasn't something we thought about before. It was more manufacturing or facilities or logistics. But now, do we all wear masks? Do we wear gloves? If, the smokers are outside having a cigarette, do we now set, that 6-foot social distancing that they're doing at the grocery stores? I just think there's a lot of preparation and things that we need to be prepared for as businesses and what that disruption looks like. I think something that we haven't thought about is we need to create like an emergency response team. What happens at that moment in time that somebody comes in and says, I tested positive, or I feel sick and I have a temperature, and they went and got a cup of coffee and did all these things, and now you need to contain it. You've got to prepare.
I would agree. And some of the things I think that we've talked about in other sessions, but really I think it kind of comes to fruition here, are things like really planning for like staggered work schedules. How do we make sure that people are coming in and out? Or if you were working remote before, could you work part remote and part at the office? And maybe you switch your employees next door, right? So you've got maybe cubicle situation set up, and you've got one cubicle where somebody comes in, the next one they're not, and you flip it the next day. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. One of the things I know I was speaking about with one of our clients was that, what if you have people who are still concerned about coming back? And we've talked about that, like that anxiety. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to say, okay, if we're going to bring back half of our team to work in the office, let's just say, and the other half to be remote, you probably have some people who are really anxious to get back into the office, and then you have others that are not. So what if you were to pose that out to your workforce? for greater purposes of thinking about down the road, so that you don't have people worried about being at the office, potentially setting a claim against you for having to be in the office. There could be a lot of emotional pieces to that as well. Those are just some
Absolutely.
of the things I think that we've kind of talked about. And Jeannie, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about critical positions. I agree with you though, Mike. Like we're not going back, right? Like business as usual, I just don't think can really be a phrase kind of any longer.
This is a time when, oddly enough, even though there are so many nuts and bolts things to figure out, the mechanics of things, the new processes that we have to follow, the adaptations, great. Soft skills, which is a term I hate. The essential people skills are having their day now, because so many workshops that are offered through Elevate typically, it's becoming clearer to leaders that, Amanda, I think you referenced the putting it out there to the troops. Because I'll tell you, right, in my own little department for the county government, suddenly people who have DISC profiles that are like C's and like, very process oriented, are suddenly more open-minded about, what's everybody doing to be able to adapt? Maybe we should hear what everybody else has to say. And so hopefully this is opening up the door for more involvement. I've long been a believer in not only open book management, but also openness in including people in the business planning, because without them, I just think it's more clear now that including everybody's ideas is a real good idea.
I would agree with that. And it's a wonderful segue right into our next question, which is very helpful.
We didn't rehearse.
I know, we didn't actually. So this is great. So I will say our next question or something that, again, that was processing through. So if we're going to start bringing people back into the workplace, what does that look like? Or in other words, how do we communicate that to the team? So you're talking about having kind of some open door policies, some open communication strategies, and I think that's great. Let's talk a little brass tacks. And Jeannie, I'm going to go over to you first just to kind of ask a little bit. Tell me, when I say like, what do you think, what does that mean? Do we need offer letters? Share a little bit about what that really looks like, maybe kind of on that tactical level, as well as the strategy part that Mike's talking about.
Absolutely. A checklist. I mean, you're fundamentally, some folks potentially have been furloughed, some have been laid off, some are going to be maybe even new hires. But yeah, at the end of the day, you're bringing a whole slew of people back who may not have been actively working. So it's a great time actually to kind of do some compliance check-in too. Maybe you were missing some things previously in their employee files, and now you're onboarding them again or for the first time. And you can kind of clean up those files. But I think an offer letter is actually a great idea because you're restating your at-will employment. You're also kind of talking, the new W-4 came out, 2020. You can't just assume that the 2019 elections came, or maybe you have an opportunity if you laid them off and there's been enough time, well, probably hasn't been enough time for an I-9, but maybe you want to go ahead and do a new one because you looked at the old one and you were missing one, or maybe it wasn't correct. It's probably also a good time to kind of just establish what that re-onboarding looks like from start to finish. From offer letters to first day training to communication, points of contact, social distancing. What do those restrictions look like? Training, how to wash your hands. I realize it's probably been a lot in the workplace, but it's probably not a bad idea to reestablish what that looks like. Signage. We had a comment. Somebody said, consider who's high risk of coming back. The immune compromised folks, maybe, before it wasn't as big a deal, but now it is. If we're all HR people or we're business leaders, maybe you kind of get a matrix going of what that is: high risk, medium risk, low risk, no risk, and establish those parameters as you begin to re-onboard folks.
I would agree with that. And some of the things that we've been talking about, because I know we're talk a lot about training, which I want to loop Mike in on. But some of the things that when I was thinking about this question just myself was how do, like you said, how do we reintegrate? How do we redeploy people? Some people have been there for a long time and never left. And some people had reduced hours, or you now need to bring them up to speed. How are you planning to do that? I think from an OSHA perspective, making sure that we're keeping our employees safe isn't now just manufacturing specific, right? You have risk when you aren't wearing PPE, when you're not doing that. And so almost in our office environments, we have a lot of risk that we hadn't had before. And one of the things that we know that they're suggesting is that you can go ahead and take temperatures for people. You can do that. But let's think about what that looks like. So think of your own facility. Do you have secure entrance? Do you have multiple entrances? Do you have badge in and badge out? So let's say you do. Are you going to have a temperature checking place at each one of those stations? Are they going to be there all day? Are these people trained? If you're not a medical staff, do you have the right tool, like an infrared type of temperature change, so you don't have to be close to people, or as close as you need to be to take that temperature? Are they trained properly to do that? And then the question becomes, okay, if you're not staggering work schedules, or let's say you are, but it takes a minute, or you have some tool malfunctions or something like that. Now, are you building a line outside of your organization and that people can see driving by? And are you maintaining 6-foot distance in that timeline? So I think there's a lot of things to consider as you're trying to reintegrate people in, and it has to really be identified. So Mike, to your point, not only are we really thinking about this from an HR perspective, but we need to be engaging with facilities if we aren't already doing that. We need to make sure we're communicating, that we have our technology person on staff so they understand all of the different pieces that we need to put together. There's a lot that we did a month ago to get everybody remote. There's a lot we need to do to get people to come back too. What are your thoughts?
There's something else too that we're suddenly seeing, and it's a shame that it takes a international crisis to bring this about. But boy, we're sure seeing fast action on some things that previously were on the back burner. Now they are suddenly pushed forward and getting acted on. And Jeannie, mentioned compliance, but also checklists and such. That some of the stuff that we had been thinking, thinking of them as back burner items. No, they're pretty urgent now. People are in high alert mode right now, and have more of a bias toward action. So it's a time to GSD, get some stuff done, and don't waste a good crisis. I'm amused. I think Jeannie also mentioned that it's a good time to be clarifying who the emergency alert or response teams are, in our respective organizations. There is a workshop, and I'm not just peddling the workshop because suddenly I don't have to, but for 5 years that I've been with the agency, I just regularly schedule this quiet little crisis communication planning workshop because it's what I used to be responsible for in my corporation life, right? I've had to beg people. I've done that workshop for like 2 people. Because it's always we mean to get to it now. I've had to book 3 more because suddenly it's of interest. So I say, let's capitalize on that and get some stuff done that we knew shouldn't be left, lingering.
Mike, once again, excellent timing. Let's talk about that, right? So, I think we have learned that.
Now I'm worried in one of 2 ways. Either because we didn't rehearse.
We did.
I'm worried if we're thinking too much alike. So.
I know. We've just done too many of these. That's probably what it is. I'll say, so I think we've learned then that we need to develop some good planning for crisis times, right? So what are your thoughts around this? And Mike, let's start with you, because I know you are referencing a crisis training program that you have. Without sharing everything about it, what are some of those things that you think that you really cover in that your people really need to understand? These are the things that need to be thought about when you're going through this.
Well, look, I ain't too proud to beg, like the old rock song says, that doing a crisis communication plan, mapping it out, unlike strategic plans that we all make fun of and they sit on a shelf and they gather dust, the doing of a crisis comms planning session is half the value. Doing that exercise, at least having it on the brain radar and having it ready if something unexpected happens, because I've been around situations even involving loss of life, accidents, facilities, explosions, things like that. You just have to have something ready. And this has caught a lot of people. Now it's on their radar that, yeah, maybe having something ready is a good idea.
I would agree with that.
People think. A lot of it involves checklists, simple things like calling trees that have redundancy in case, that have 2 or 3 at each level. Just little things that we keep meaning to get to.
You're exactly right. It's those back burner things that really now have become that front burner item. And Jeannie, what are your thoughts? I know we've talked a lot about this and have different checklists and things like that. And some of the areas that you made me think about when this first started, cybersecurity, those types of things. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I actually, in a prior life, I worked in the financial industry and banking, and we found out a business continuity plan. We didn't really ever think about it until we had, I think it was in 2008, we had a tornado take out one of our banks, and we realized everybody needs a BCP plan for everything, whether it's natural disaster, an international pandemic. But it's not just enough to have one. I think you'll agree, Mike, you actually have to test it. You have to put it into practice. You have to train to it. And it's not like a plan that you create and put it on the shelf. It's an evolution. It's always ongoing. I think training at this point is going to be critical as it go forward. Whether you're onboarding people, whether you're teaching them crisis planning, redundancy. I think we found out a lot of people teleworking remotely became challenging. There was a lot more cybersecurity issues. People were phishing and, saying, hey, take this COVID webinar, and then you click on it and they've now gotten into your network and they've hacked your files and things like that. So there was a lot of people preying on people during this time. So I think there's all kinds of opportunities outside of just the issue at hand. Now it's redeveloping, infrastructure and technology and everybody working together to do that.
I would agree with that. And you also are just reading my mind. So let's go to the next one, which is really kind of what we're talking about. So there are so many things to work on right now, right? And companies may want to get right back into the swing of things like we're talking about. Probably not the reality. We're just not in that space. So why would training be something that companies could focus on right now? Like, why is that important overall, do we think? And Mike, let's start with you.
Thank you. Because I obviously have a view on this, because training, which in tough times or belt tightening and what have you, often is victimized, like, oh, we can cut back on that. Yeah, failing to develop people is insane to begin with. It's just not a smart business strategy. But right now is a totally fabulous time to do it. And surprisingly, even though all skill building types of training are great, the essential people skills training, some of the most popular things we've been offering pre-crisis and up through the month of April have been related to culture of belonging, purpose-driven cultures, topics like that it would be a mistake to think that the more rough and tumble working companies, maybe with field technicians and laborers and such, that that this kind of high-minded stuff is for the office crowd. No way. If you look at, and I'll be glad to share it with anybody who sends me an email and asks for it, a link to the McKinsey report, the study of the future of work, because the expectation now with employees is that the employer will have the lead role in personal and professional development, in educating people, because one great thing we're getting out of the youngest groups in the workforce, millennials and Zoomers, is the expectation that, hey, I'm coming on board and I expect to learn more and you will help me grow, or else for 10 cents more, I'll walk down the street. So it is a good time to send a signal to employees that you believe in them, and especially in this weird workforce management dilemma that we're in, if you want to be the employer of choice, you will send a signal that you believe in growing people. So there's my sermonizing for today, but it's the real stuff that gets employees' attention. If your senior leaders are thinking, oh, that's too squishy, shake them real hard.
I think you're right. And I think that, well, let me go to Jeannie first. Jeannie, what would you like to add?
Oh, first of all, I've never heard the term Zoomer, so I think I like that.
That's actually, the payback for okay boomer.
Okay, fair enough. You know, it's funny. I spent a lot of time years ago, kind of back before we had millennials and zennials, but just looking at the different workforces. And I think fundamentally, and honestly, other than perhaps maybe the traditionalists or the boomers, everybody's going to leave for 10 cents more an hour. And it's not about the money per se. Amanda and I have had this debate, I think, for years and years. People don't wake up one day and say, darn it, I need to make 50 cents more an hour. They wake up one day and say, darn it, my work environment is not good, or my supervisor is horrific. Those are usually the two things. And then when they determine that, well, of course, then they want to make 50 cents more an hour. So it kind of has a byproduct of the first half. That being said, I actually look at this a little bit differently. I think training is great, but here's the reason why now is the best time. Carpe diem, seize the day. You know, a lot of employers paid for or signed up for the PPP through the Small Business Administration, and they've got to rehire a significant amount of workforce. So the question is, what do you do in that short interim time, because your business has been closed? Perhaps you're a restaurant, or you're some type of retail or hotel, or who knows what type of business, because most were closed. But now is the time to train them, because you need to rehire them, or the expectation is to rehire them to get the potential forgiveness for the loan. Why not train them? I mean, you need something to do to bring them back, because you haven't had a lot of work previously. Training is a good first supplement. I mean, get them soft skills training, get them the technical training, maybe the COVID training, all of it, because you got to pay them anyway, and you got a little downtime, and it's a good reintegration to get them back into a productive workforce.
Absolutely. And you know, even taking it one step further, kind of to what both of you are discussing here, we are in this new space, this new training space. So while we have some of those culture pieces, I know Paulette, speaking of Paulette, does an amazing kind of manager, supervisor training, which is fantastic. And it is. And I think that when you're kind of working through those levels of training and that type of workflow, we have a real opportunity here to shift a little with it, because we're going to have employee relations issues in different ways. It's going to be the same old, you know, oldies but goodies, discrimination, concerns, HIPAA, policy, you know, all of those things are still going to be there, but it's going to pivot a bit. And I think that really retooling how we're going to explore those areas, how we need to train our managers to have empathy, to listen, to be able to manage well in a time where people are feeling like we talked about, either they're really excited to get back, or maybe this is very anxiety ridden for them. We need to be able to teach them how to have those conversations in the realm of what's responsible, so that we don't then find ourselves 6 months, 8 months, 12 months from now, battling some type of legislation or lawsuit or something that has happened to us because our people were not prepared. While we're change managers and experts in that, and we can figure that out, they maybe are not. That's not their skill. It's not what they are trained to do every day. So that's kind of where I look at it and I say, this is our challenge, gauntlet down, challenge accepted. How do we retool, reshift even some of those things that we've done in the past in a way that makes sense now and can be adapted and scaled to fit the needs of today? And I think that's something we need to think about.
I would agree. And I also want to go back to something you said earlier about the taking of temperatures. You gave everything perfect. I couldn't have done anything else, and I just did. Don't forget about protecting that personal health information. As you're gaining temperatures, and depending on how you do it, whether you're writing it down or you're collecting it electronically. I know somebody who used stickers, another person, they were using an app. There's an app out there to help, Wi-Fi to an employer database. So just be careful about the storage of that information. And then one other thing, we're talking about employee engagement. Prior to COVID, this was probably one of, I know in my career, this was the worst recruiting and talent acquisition. It was a very tight labor market. And now the paradigm is going to shift a little bit, but that doesn't mean, kind of jumping back in time to the last recession, that you should abuse your applicants or your employees or treat them any differently. Actually, now is the time to be that premier employer and engage them, and be very cognizant that, this is a very defining moment. If you do not do it right from the get-go, they will leave you and they will go find an employer who will treat them correctly.
Hey, Jeannie, that is a fantastic point, because that employer of choice thing, this is one of the ways you show that. And I would add to it the tools that we use, because now that we know more, like I got to tell you, I have seen managers who previously were fixed on certain ways of doing things, like you had to get the team together in the same place and do this and that. Now, I've had people log in to these sessions from their horsetooth hike on smartphones and such. For field technicians out in the field in their trucks, we're reducing distance as an objection. That objection is no longer valid. So with tools like Slack and Zoom and what have you, come on, let's let it work for us.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. And something I saw on Instagram, and I guess it's okay. I mean, we've talked about how great Paulette is. I'm actually going to give another plug to another sister organization out there. Not that they're our sister, but they're an amazing organization. I saw Define the Line posted an Instagram post, and they said, go back and relook at your harassment policies. And I thought, well, what does that matter? You're virtual. And then now I know why. I saw a video where they were doing a Zoom meeting, and from the waist up, they looked like they were all business, but from the waist down, they forgot to put their pants on. So I think we need to really think, virtual it does still have some appropriate expectations.
It does, absolutely. And how we perceive, I think that we can all agree that there is certainly a level of casualness that that we've accepted.
Or too casual.
Correct. And that we've accepted with being in this space that that we also need to be aware of, and I think that there's a lot of flexibility and grace there. And I am all for that. I'm saying, hey, be you, be what is there. There is still that element of professionalism that we need to be concerned with. And and I don't think people were quite ready for that. Again, it's just kind of shifted and everybody, I joke about it and I say it's probably been, I think, Jeannie, we were talking about it since we've been working remote, right? Most everybody has 40 days since I've really had to worry about jeans. Thank God, But I think that that's something that we just want to kind of take to heart and understand that there's still kind of that element of we are still working. So I think great points all around.
Harassment, I mean, it's not just video. It can be over the phone. It can be these things that I don't think we really thought about before, because these were workplace items. And now that we're adapting to this telework remote type of environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think our goal really today was to try to share. We've had passionate conversations around this, certainly. I know that the three of us are really passionate about training, development, HR, obviously, in general. And so I think this was an opportunity for us to kind of highlight some of those things. For that, our goal is not to overwhelm people. It certainly is not to give people a long list of things they need to be considering. But if you walk away with some of that and some things to think about, then we did what we were trying to do here today. That said, I don't know if we have any questions in the queue or not. I'd like to leave a few moments to allow us to answer any questions if there are some. If not, then we will kind of wrap up and give you a little time back today. Jeannie, is there anything in the queue?
There is not. We've gotten some good comments, but definitely no questions. I just want to kind of throw in some things for folks to think about that
Please.
We have been working with our clients beyond just the kind of the whole onboarding integration, call it whatever keyword or buzzword you'd like. But you said something earlier about, does the employee need to come back, or what if they don't want to come back? I also think there's more. You need to think about some possible ADA considerations. Mm-hmm. You and I just recently had a conversation about that, and there's some new case law actually revolving that. So definitely something to think about. Daycare, there's some great websites that Colorado's put out about what daycare will be open. Referring employers back to the CDC, I think, is always essential. Legal compliance, OSHA already kind of regulates. They have a pandemic sample guideline. Yes. I think it's something good that HR people should go back and reference. I think, again, making reasonable accommodation to those who may be compromised, seeking treatment, who have been ill, who've been around somebody. And then I just did a webinar about PTSD. People are actually, and I can see it, the trauma of the depression, the trauma of not working. You and I sat on a Zoom call where it was a whole bunch of extroverts in the room, and then we had an introvert, and she's like, look, this is the best thing ever. And we were like, didn't even think about that. But we need to think about those people when they come back.
We do. And some of the areas that Jeannie is referencing were in our previous sessions, which I will like to say is that they are recorded on our YouTube channel, which is titled HR Explained, but we will send a link to that to everybody attending on this call today. We did have a couple of questions, and so I'm going to go ahead and jump into those really quickly. Let's see. So it says, what are thoughts on employers requiring certain requirements for working from home? So for example, a quiet space, fast internet, good phone connection. I'm assuming that the question is kind of around, what are the thoughts that if employers are requiring these things, is it,
or can you require them?
Can you, that's what I'm thinking, right? Can you require that? It's a good question. Jeannie, what are your thoughts?
So the quiet space, and absolutely. I was on a conference call just here recently, and it is distracting. So I think that's a reasonable expectation. It would be really no different in the work environment. If you were in an office and you were in a heated call, somebody would either expect you to lower your voice, shut your door. So it's making those reasonable accommodations. The fast internet and good phone connection, those are some challenging questions. I think as an employer, since we are trying to be flexible, maybe you meet them halfway. If they don't have reliable internet, perhaps maybe it's for a short term subsidizing it. You're not experiencing a lot of in-person costs, so I think it's a reasonable meet them halfway, help them increase their bandwidth or their internet perhaps.
I would agree with that. I think that if it's something reasonable that can be something that the employer can do in order to make sure this person can work and do what they need to do, the employer should probably be looking at that.
And I would just say, because I don't have the HR background, my background is in leading and managing big teams. The reasonable person test can come into into play here. There's a fairness issue about fast internet and good connection that we have to be sensitive to. But boy, I don't think there are good, hard and fast rules in place that we could consider go to, but reasonable people should be able to agree. And that's always been the case with teleworking itself.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody is cut out for it. It's reasonable to ask for some form of litmus test, I think.
We've seen some case law around reasonable accommodations in the past. I know Jeannie and I use one example in particular when we're doing training sessions, that there's a pretty high level in some case law that suggests what reasonable accommodation looks like. So certainly something to be considering when you're looking at this.
And if unsure, always reach out to your counsel, your legal counsel.
Agree. The next question that we had is, what would you suggest for our 60 plus employees related to the governor's safer at home recommendations? That's a good one. Jeannie, you want to start?
Sure. I actually had the opportunity to listen to his entire press conference, and he went out of his way to emphasize employers' moral, ethical responsibility to help protect our aged population. So I think given that leadership stance from the get-go, we as employers should probably follow suit. And what does that look like? Well, depending on your workplace, can you make accommodations within the workplace to segregate and help keep them safe and take an already at-risk population and reduce the exposure? That may not be possible. So then is teleworking still an option? I also believe, again, this is an ADA potential situation. You need to engage in the interactive process and have that conversation with that at-risk population.
Absolutely.
Here's the thing in that situation. I am such a big believer in polling and taking the temperature of the employees. Don't overpromise, but ask people how they're feeling, especially if you know that you're about to, please use this tip. You might think it sounds like cheating, but I remember it from my good old days when I was responsible for organizational communication wherever I went. And in the good old days, folks, back in my day, when smoking was still okay, which is weird, whenever there was a new policy to put out that might hit some people as unpopular, putting it out there first and saying, hey, we'd like to know what people think, that because no matter, even if you've already made the policy decision, you know what? It doesn't hurt to put it out there so that you can say, yep, heard you, here's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So my advice to that person who wondered about the 60 plus employees is take their temperature, ask them how they feel about things, and then, yes, based on what we've heard and what makes best sense, here's what we're going to do. So
you just described some really great actions in that interactive process too there, Mike. Engaging in dialogue, right? Communication. Awesome. Our next question is, what are thoughts on overtime use in the PPP loan forgiveness? I guess I'm not quite sure what that's saying.
It's counted.
Just saying, okay, go ahead, Jeannie.
I wonder if they're asking if overtime is counted in the calculation of hours or in the compensation.
I think because it's saying in the PPP loan forgiveness piece that whether or not you can count if you pay overtime out. Yeah, I would assume the same.
Yeah, it's wages. I mean, if somebody, you went back when you initially applied for your PP loan, you went back and you figured your average monthly payroll over the course of X number of months, depending on what criteria or what example you fell into. But let's just say it was, for even numbers, it was $1,000 over the course of 12 months. If said employee earned $1,100, then it'll be $1,100. I think that's why they allowed folks, for one of many reasons, to borrow up to 2.5 times the amount eligible for your monthly payroll, because not everybody has a mortgage or not everybody has those things. It's going to be solely used for payroll, and they may have a massive influx of overtime. So
They may,
I think that.
absolutely. And I think I would agree. Obviously, we're going to say our disclaimer, we're not the tax people. So certainly something to
Agree.
circle back with your accountant on just to be sure. But in our understanding, 75% for loan forgiveness needs to be used towards payroll. I would assume that counts as payroll. So that would be just kind of my thinking overall as well.
Additionally, the IRS has a great FAQ out there. So if you head out and just kind of go into the IRS website and type in PPP FAQ or Q&A or something like that, they have, I think there's 50 or 60 questions, and that overtime is in one of those questions. I don't remember what the pieces or parts were, but I think if you go out to the IRS website, you might get some additional guidance.
Yep. And we just heard back that that's what we were asking. So thank you. Glad that we were able to help. It looks like we do have a couple of just other comments really quickly that I will share just because it was good in this space of what we're talking about. One more question. Is a business with many different rooms and floors allowed to have 10 in the building, or is it okay to limit them gathering? That's a good question. As long as they do not come within 6 feet of everyone. I don't honestly know, and Jeannie, maybe the governor was more clear, and you caught that piece. Do you know if they have specified what meeting in 10 means?
They didn't go into that level of detail, but my assumption would be back to the very beginning. I mean, they even talked about people in an office work environment trying to keep that social distance and the small group. So somehow you have to kind of manage both depending on the size of the room.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that either. My guess is that public health site for Colorado continues to have a lot of updated, and once the order is really fully executed, that should be available on that website. And then you'll see like kind of all the specifications. So the PowerPoint presentation that we're sharing is just from the presentation that they had, but I'd encourage you to really look at the Colorado Public Health website because they do have a lot of great clarifying information there. And then just a couple of quick notes that I just want to share just for our purposes. Doing the speed test for seeing whether or not you're wired in or Wi-Fi or what that looks like could be helpful when you're trying to connect with your employer regarding internet capabilities and things like that. That was a great little tip that I thought I would just share that somebody shared into the chat. And then also, Paulette, thank you. She just wanted to say that Mike also makes a good point about communicating early and often with all employees. Transparency is key in a crisis. And that A, both sounds like very Paulette, and B, great advice. So I think we can all get on board with that. Seeing no other questions coming in, I do want to say really quickly to my colleagues here, is there anything else you would like to say with regard to what we're talking about today? Jeannie, Mike?
One last thing.
Mike, go ahead.
And then both of you can speak, both of you from HRX, because I just want to say to everybody, and because you're recording this, I want to say on the record that this work that HRX and others from the Elevate faculty have done on a pro bono basis in a time of need is so generous, so impressive. I appreciate it so much. We're going to continue post-April with more offerings, and so be on the lookout for those. But thank you, professionals.
Oh, thank you, Mike. You're welcome. Jeannie, anything?
Aw. I was actually going to thank him for having us. but I appreciate it. Both of us have thoroughly enjoyed these opportunities to kind of get out there. And if anybody knows us individually, they know that we are big on advancing not only the HR profession, but kind of just getting good information out there. I know Amanda said she'll be sending the slides. We may want to send the governor's PowerPoint as well. There's a lot of good information in there.
We can, absolutely. Well, once again, I would like to remind you then, as Mike has shared, we are recording this session. So we will share this along with the slides. So we'll go ahead and make sure that we can include the governor's presentation, no problem. Thank you, Jeannie and Mike, for being my partners in this effort. Could not have done it without you. And like I said before, I wouldn't probably want to. So just a reminder, none of us here are attorneys or tax accountants, and nothing we are providing should be construed as legal or financial advice. Signing off after this April month, I will say thank you once again for joining us, and we hope you all have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.